So I know it's been a while since my last video, and it's mostly been because of school and that sort of stuff. But now I'm back to talk about some movies, so let's get started. Dear Evan Hansen came out a couple of days ago, and I saw it a couple of days ago. This review will include some spoilers, so if you haven't seen Dear Evan Hansen yet and want to, go check it out and then come back. Going into this film, I was pretty interested to see what it had in store, considering I thought In the Heights was one of the year's best films so far. Respect if you count that, and that was also pretty good. And also Viva, which was also very good. So I was interested to see the year's next big musical. And overall, I thought that this film was pretty beautiful. But there is a lot of problems with this film, and they're pretty front and center. And even though this film is still very good and heartwarming, you can't really ignore the problem. Let's start off by talking about the music. The music in here is really good. The best songs are Sincerely Me, You Will Be Found, Requiem, and If I Could Tell Her. Those are the most important and standout songs in the film. And my favorite is Sincerely Me just because of how fun and upbeat it is. But the rest are very good because they all have an emotional importance to them. The one problem with the songs is that the other ones are pretty forgettable. There's only like 4 or 5 standouts, and there's about 10 songs in here, so there's about half that are pretty forgettable. And they also mix with each other pretty easily, and it's kind of hard to remember which song is which when you look back on the film. Let's talk about the pacing. The pacing I thought was actually pretty good. Most people say that the pacing is the worst part of the movie and you feel the runtime, but I didn't think so. I think that this movie felt about a half hour shorter than it actually was. And I don't think that it was ever particularly boring. There are a handful of scenes that do overstay their welcome, and it feels like they could have been cut down a couple minutes, but it's mostly fast moving and never boring, except for the last 20 minutes, which we'll get to in a little bit. This film is basically divided into 2 halves, and they're both great. The first half is a more upbeat and fun musical where you can just go along with the characters and have fun, and there's some comedy in there. And then the second half is a very emotional and deep musical where everything is set into motion and there's a bunch of reveals about characters, and it's honestly a bit of a tearjerker, and most people will probably cry during it. And the 2 halves are so different from each other that it feels like you just watched 2 separate movies in the best way. Let's talk about the characters. Most of the characters are pretty good. Evan, Zoe, Connor, and Oliver, they really work at the emotion, especially Connor for about the 2 scenes that he's in before he kills himself. And the rest also work at the emotion at the loss of Connor, but they also work at chemistry. But the other characters feel lackluster and kind of pointless in the story. Even some that are important to the story, like Evan's mom, they were just not in the movie that often to seem like they were important characters. And Alana's decision where she decides to put Evan's letter on the internet without knowing that it's Evan's letter really soured me on the character. And even though I liked Alana for most of the movie, that choice just really made me sour on her character. The actors also seem a bit too old to play their characters, and you can really tell that they're not in high school anymore. But it's definitely not as bad as everyone says, and you kind of forget about it like a half hour in. Let's talk about the emotion. The emotion is really well executed at the right moments, and it doesn't feel cliched or anything. And it's one of the more emotional films that I've seen, and it's a real tearjerker, like I said earlier. Let's get into the standout problems now, and let's start off with the last 20 minutes. The last 20 minutes are not very good. It really feels like it rushes to the end because they realize they reached the 2 hour mark already, and it feels like we're just cutting to the end way too fast. And I wanted to see how the characters' initial reactions were before we jump 6 months into the future. And it also doesn't end in a satisfying way because nothing really feels wrapped up, and Evan doesn't really talk to the Murphys that much, even though they were that big part of the story. The other problem with this film is that it's uncomfortable. I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but there's a lot of things that Evan Hansen does in this movie that makes the movie really uncomfortable. And he also gets away with it way too easily, and it feels like people would catch on that he's lying way earlier. In the end, Dear Evan Hansen is a very impactful and important film that I feel like anyone struggling with like depression or anxiety should see. And I think that everyone should see this movie at least once. If it weren't for the problems, I would give this movie a higher score, but since there are a lot of glaring problems, I'm going to give Dear Evan Hansen an extremely positive 7 out of 10. Guys, thanks so much for watching. You can check out my other channels in the description, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!